Hi! In this lesson, we're going to introduce one of the most fundamental concepts in programming, variables. As you experienced in your previous activity, it's very easy to make calculations with Python and keeping it organized with our strings. Here's a similar example that calculates the volume of a rectangular prism. The problem is, I can't really remember what the numbers 2, 4, and 8 mean. In programming, just like in math, we don't just use numbers in our calculations, we use variables. So let's talk about variables. A variable is like a box with a name that holds a value to be used throughout a program. Let's take this box here and name it length. Now, let's store the value 8 inside of it. We can print the value of the variable by using its name in a print statement. Notice, there are no quotes around the name. This is because it's a variable name, not a string we're trying to print. To create a variable in Python, we have what is called an assignment statement. There are two parts to the statement: the name of the variable, length, and the value we're assigning to it, 8. Again, when I run this program, the print statement prints the value of the variable, not the name. Since we're storing a whole number, the type of the variable is called an integer variable. As a reminder, an integer is any positive or negative whole number that doesn't have a decimal. If it did have a decimal, then we call it a float variable. A float number is really just an integer with a decimal point. We can also store a string or text in a variable, like the word feet. We have a similar assignment statement as before. The name is unit, but now the stored value is feet. We need quotes around feet because it's a string we're storing, in contrast to the variable name. When we print unit, the value still prints, which this time is the word feet. Since the variable stored a string, we call this a string variable. The last thing we need to talk about is how to name a variable. There are a few guidelines to follow here. A variable name must be descriptive, meaning the name must describe what the variable is representing. Variable name variable means nothing, whereas with is telling us what it is storing. A variable name can't start with a number, and most often should start with a lowercase letter. Instead of one length, change it to length_1. All letters in a variable name should be lowercase. So instead of height with a capital H, we would write height with a lowercase h. Variable names use underscores to separate words instead of spaces. So instead of shape space type, we would write shape_type. Okay, let's take our last example and incorporate our variables. The first step is to add the variable assignment lines. We create a length variable and assign it a value of 8, a width variable and assign it the value of 4, and a height variable with a value of 2. The second step is to replace the numbers in the print statement with the variable names. Already this looks a lot cleaner. I know what the numbers mean now. Notice the output has not changed. Remember, there should still be no quotes around the variable names. And finally, let's create a variable called volume, assigning the calculation of length times width times height. Now, we can use the variable volume in our print statement. Doesn't this look so much more organized? Variables are an incredibly important part of programming. Poor use of variables can result in many headaches, mistakes, and inefficiencies down the road. And let's be clear, while you'll see something like V is equal to L times W times H in math class, we're doing the same thing in programming with volumes equal to length times width times height. We're just using more descriptive names. We can always use letters in Python as well, but that's usually not as effective. In any case, both sets of variables are representing values that they store. They're just placeholders. The only difference may be when we actually calculate the result. In math class, we substitute the values and solve. In programming, values are assigned elsewhere in the program, and the calculation is still done with variables. This makes it easy to change the values of the variables, and then we have the calculations automatically update. Let's hop over to the live editor to show you another example. In this case, we'll calculate the surface area of the perimeter of one of the raised garden beds shown here in yellow. This will be 2 long sides and 2 short sides, the total surface area being the sum of the individual areas. Here's the code from the earlier example, where we calculated the volume. The garden bed had a length of 8, width of 4, and height of 2. We then calculated the volume and printed it. Now, let's write a program that calculates the perimeter area of the garden bed using the same variables. The area will be 2 long sides plus 2 short sides. So let's first calculate the area of the longer side, which is 8. So we can create a variable called long side and assign it the calculation of length times height. The shorter side, 4, would have an area of the width times height, so we can create an additional variable called short side and assign it the value of the width times height. In our print statement, let's start by writing a string label. And then, using the string function, we add the calculation of the surface area. The surface area is 2 times the long side plus 2 times the short side. So we would write long side times 2 plus short side times 2. When we run this, we get a perimeter area of 48. We could also move this calculation into a variable and then include it later in a print statement to make our code more readable. So let's create a variable called surface area and assign it the value of our calculation, long side times 2 plus short side times 2. And then, in our print statement, we can update this to be surface area. And the results are still the same. What's nice about this program is that we can change the variables at the top and rerun the code to see different volumes and surface areas. So let's say we have a garden bed that's 10 length, has a width of 42, and it's super tall, so 20. And the values printed will be updated. Great, now it's your turn to try it for yourself.